Breaking news.
Did you say breaking shoes?
No, breaking news.
The year was 1832, and the French were in the midst of their revolution.
But in brighter news, the point shoe is introduced.
Have you ever wondered why the point shoe was invented? Well, join us this week on Breaking Point and find out why. We're your hosts, Sydney Miller,
Jacque Sundstrom,
Victoria Watson,
Jamie Weiss.
Bray Giants.
In 1975, Charles Didelot created the flying machine. This was a machine that allowed dancers to rise up onto their toes. The flying machine sparked interest in creating a way for dancers to dance on their toes without wires. In 1832, Marie Taglioni was the first ballerina to dance in pointe in the ballet La Sylphide. As Sydney will explain later, these shoes were satin slippers, which consisted of a leather sole and darned sides so that the shoe were able to hold their shape for the dancers to use in pointe.
As we've learned in class, point shoes were created as a way to elevate the female ballerina. However, ballet did not change from flat to point one day. The first shoes used in ballet were actually heeled ballet slippers. Choreographers then progressed to wanting the female to be heightened above the men, thus the creation of Charles Didelot's flying machine came about. This also created a gender specificity in ballet. This flying machine lifted the dancers to make the appearance that they were on their toes. The audience loved the idea of this, so innovation and technology changed the way dance was practiced. According to EmmaSandel.com, rising to point was inevitable, as ballerinas aspired for ever greater refinement, poise, and line, the peak being literally the tips of their toes. The demand for that floating quality in choreography pushed the creation of point shoes. However, the first point shoe that was created is actually nothing like the ones we use today.
The tip of the shoe is made of densely packed layers of fabric, cardboard, and/or paper hardened by glue. The rest of the shoe is made of leather, cotton, and satin. The first point shoes were made of satin with leather soles with very little support around the toes and actually had a pointed toe. In the late 18th century, the block toe was introduced by Breanna Lignani, and this brought reinforcement to the toes. This allowed for the dancer to balance for a longer amount of time on the shoes, although they were still pointed at this time. Anna Pavlova was probably among the first to add a reinforcing leather midsole. This supposedly was part of her secret shoe preparations. She is also said to have danced on shoes with wider platforms, then later to have retouched all her photos to make the tips appear slimmer. Over time, the boxes of point shoe has grown wider. It started with a very narrow, pointed box and is now flat and square-like. Before point shoes, ballerinas would dance on their toes with an invention made by Charles Didelot. This was called the flying machine, and it would lift dancers up with wires so they could rise to the tops of their toes and dance. Each shoe is custom-made and handcrafted to fit each dancer's unique specifications. No two pairs of point shoes are identical.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. Want to know some super cool fun facts about point shoes? Of course you do. Well, here it is. It wasn't until after the dancers took off the heels of their shoes that the flat-bottom shoes were introduced. These soft, flat-bottomed shoes, also known as ballet slippers, were introduced in the 18th century. Like Jamie mentioned, it wasn't until 1795 that the first dancers were actually able to rise to their toes while being suspended by wires. Believe it or not, it actually wasn't until the end of the 18th century when we first started to see a glimpse of the point shoes we're familiar with today. These included the creation of the box, the first surface on the toe that the dancers were to rise up onto. With this addition, the dancer is able to sustain much longer balances and complete multiple pirouettes on point on their own. Today, most of the shoes are fashioned with layers of satin stiffened with glue. Then there is a narrow sole, often made of leather. The perfect point shoe should provide support while allowing articulation of the foot, elevate the beauty of the foot rather than detract from it, and allow the dancer to develop and use their own strength rather than to be propped up on one stiff shoe. Crazy, right? I know. I know.
Throughout classical ballet, point shoes themselves were used to make it look as though dancers were flying through the air. The shoes allowed the dancers to make it look as though they were flying through the air, as though they were weightless, which further influenced the mystical feeling that you would see during Act 2. Another fun fact: allowing the change of the shape of the point shoe gave the dancers a wider block for them to stand on, which gave them more mobility in terms of movement, which also helped to develop other technical aspects too. By donning her slippers, Marie Taglioni furthered the ballerina's rise to dominance and authority. She used her shoes as a way to show power and resilience.
So why is this important to people who don't do point? Well, point is being used in more contemporary pieces, and even men are doing point now, so it's really important to every dancer.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of The Breaking Point, the history of the point shoe. We hope you can join us all next week. Thanks for watching!